we invested in an AI product early that worked out really well. Like, so we now have this sort of AI physics operating system to help our customers build their own AI models. At the time, when we started that investment, I would say it was still pretty controversial whether this space would even like.
When did you do that?
Probably about 2.5 years ago.
Cool.
But I think another one, which I would say, like, we don't yet know, like, how this is going to pan out, although, like, we have some success already with, we do a lot of work with Department of Defense. And so we have this sort of entire platform commitment over a multi-year period to get certified for FedRAMP, IL5, all these things to be able to serve this sort of, like, defense industry. That's been a huge investment from our side.
Hey everyone, welcome to Founders in Arms podcast with me, Emad Akun, co-founder and CEO of Mercury.
And I'm Raj Suri, co-founder of Lima and Tribe. And today we have Joris Poort, a longtime friend of the podcast and founder and CEO of Rescale. Welcome, Joris.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Joris, I mean, you're my friend, but it's the first time you're meeting Emad, right?
That's right. Hi, Emad. How are you doing?
Yeah,
I heard you're OG YC, so it's nice to connect with the old YC founders for sure.
We scaled at YC too?
We did back in 2012. So it's been a little while.
That's pretty old school. It's funny when I did YC in 2007, and at that point I thought, wow, YC's been around for so long, and like, you know, I'm so late to this game. And I bet you thought the same thing in 2012, but now we're all old.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think every founder kind of feels like that, maybe for their company, but also for like the entire ecosystem. It's late to the game. But
I mean, the same thing happens actually in like a trend or a startup or whatever. You know, when I started Mercury, I was like, wow, like fintech's been around for so long. Like, I'm like late to this game. I have to learn all this stuff. And, it turned out 2017 was like extremely early in fintech. I think people are doing that right now with AI. Like they think like AI, like they're late to AI if they start like a new AI company.
Yeah. I think all great things take time, right? And so I think it's a common journey that founders go through where you're like way too early to market, but you think it's already happened. Yeah.
Emma, guess where Joris and I met?
Yeah, what do you mean?
We met at PG's place in the UK. We were both guests there at the same time. Yeah.
Just like, you went last summer,
It's a real
right?
YC story, huh?
Last summer?
This was two summers ago, right?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah,
a couple years ago. Right. Yeah. You were doing a bunch of traveling for work. I had just left Presto, and
so PG's like retired in this like mansion in England. Is that the right way to describe it?
I don't say he's retired, right? He's like still like he's doing investments. So
yeah, he does.
Yeah. He's definitely still in the game, but I think his real passion is around writing and that kind of
art,
thing, right?
He's a big art collector. Yeah. And like I don't think he talks about it much on his tech persona, but like that's a big passion of his, like painting and buying paintings especially. That's what he's a big deal, I think, in the art world.
Every now and then you see him on X like raving about some art thing about like how people don't appreciate art or something like that. So you get a sense that you get to.
His entire place is like a historical artifact, or like
really?
It's really impressive. I don't think you'll mind us saying that it's a very impressive place, And
is it mostly European art he's collecting, or like?
Pardon?
Is it mostly European art?
Yeah, I would say all art is European, basically. From, I don't even know if there's that much Asian art. Or
I mean, there's modern art. There's definitely Asian art, like Japanese art for sure.
I mean, yeah. But no, I think it's all European, right?
Yeah. I guess expensive old stuff is mostly European.
Yeah. Well, he took like a degree in painting, right? He was like a painter or something himself, right?
Yeah. Did you ever read doesn't he have a book, Painting and Coding or something?
Hackers and Painters, right?
Oh, Hackers and Painters. That's like the one PG thing I haven't read at all.
I haven't read it. Yours, have you read that?
I've not read that one. I've read all the other ones.
That's actually kind of funny. We should try to find someone who's read it. Or maybe we should read it. We can have a Founders in Arms book club at some point. So, Joris, you've been doing this company for 13 years?
That's right. Like 14 and 3 months, not counting. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow.
Somewhere
Can you
around
describe
there,
the company? Describe what Rescale does.
Yeah, Rescale. So we provide a digital engineering platform for engineers and scientists, primarily around sort of product development. So and accelerating that entire path, right? And so We're helping, some of the best engineers and scientists all around the world, whether they're designing a rocket, developing a drug, designing a computer chip, run their entire sort of R&D process much faster. And we do that through a combination of like data, AI, compute capabilities, basically.
Oh, I see. So I'm trying to understand it better. So it's not like a Jira. It's like a cloud computing type platform for scientists and engineers, or like maybe I'm not understanding properly.
Yeah, the tip of the spear. And so our initial kind of very key focus was on high performance computing or supercomputing, right? And we started when cloud computing was just getting started. And so it's how do we provide supercomputing capabilities basically in the cloud and then sort of solve the rest of the stack. So running supercomputers is quite complicated. And so you need different layers of kind of software on top to be able to run like a large, say, aerodynamics problem, right?
Oh, cool.
And so
do you have your own supercomputers? Do you have a data center full of supercomputers?
We partner. So we use all the major cloud providers. One initial decision we made is we didn't really want to bear the CapEx, right? But we thought that was like, you can't really use VC capital to do the CapEx build out. I think like the CoreWeaves of the world have proven maybe that like through other types of financing, you can actually do that. But we felt that our kind of key focus on specifically helping the rest of the stack, assuming that the cloud providers would build out a lot of this capability, was kind of the right place to be. And then a big gap, like kind of we were as founders, myself and my co-founder, Adam, we came from Boeing as we're trying to kind of solve the problem we had ourselves when designing the 787 Dreamliner.
These cloud providers already have a supercomputer. You're building like the software on top of it to like deploy them and deploy the software on it and like coordinate all the tasks, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And if you look at the landscape, there's many combinations, right? So you have hundreds of different server architectures, different type of chips, networking technologies, all these different types of things that you can kind of choose from, right? And so solving that search problem for your specific workload or application is a pretty difficult problem to solve, right? And so our software kind of does that optimization and routing. And then it enables many new things. So once you can say, okay, I can elastically run all my, say, aerodynamics calculations, how the engineers actually work becomes quite different. So then you get into, you could train AI models on these data sets, which is we call AI physics. And so that really provides the ability for organizations to build their own kind of computational engines for physics and engineering. And then you can use all these more automation, agentic kind of capabilities throughout the product development workflow as well. And so we provide kind of a whole platform suite of those capabilities.
And has this kind of modern Gen AI stuff been like a boon to this stuff? Like are people using that in science and engineering or not really?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's different, I would say, areas where it's popular and where not yet, where maybe we also see a future. One key area that's always a challenge is when you're designing, for example, an aircraft, there's many different pretty complex physics domains. So you have like material science, maybe the structural design of a wing, the aerodynamics, and these all kind of interact with each other. So as you change the shape of a wing, you have a different aerodynamic response, which changes like the loads on the aircraft. And so you want to run all those kind of physics computations in different types of software. And there's this concept of when you first decide, hey, I want to build a rocket or build an airplane, this conceptual design phase, you're making a lot of the major choices. So in the case of this experience we had at Boeing hey, it's the first fully carbon fiber commercial aircraft. So you make that choice, you kind of want to know how that's actually going to flow through your product development process. But those calculations only get done in the detailed phase where this gets both very compute intense, takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to converge to like an optimal design. And so there's always been this concept of surrogate modeling, which is say, okay, can I abstract away all this complexity and kind of have a very simple model and optimize this concept? And then I kind of do the pre-work and then I have a pretty predictable path throughout the product development. But with AI tools, now it's possible to kind of do that surrogate modeling or the sort of abstraction much more efficiently. And it's you're going from deterministic calculations in physics to probabilistic, right? And so there's always this element of like, engineers like to have exactly the right answer. And of course you want the right answer if you're going to certify an aircraft or something like that. But you have the sort of journey of finding the best design, which can be done much more efficiently, right? And that's where AI really comes in as a probabilistic tool that can navigate that like quite efficiently. And it's like a pretty different category from LLMs, right? So it's just sort of applying the neural nets, the GPUs, all the sort of CUDA capabilities, but then applied to a different class of problems, in this case, sort of physics.
Joris, is it like a little bit like a simulator, like in terms of like it helps simulate the different environments and kind of pushes the hypothesis in different areas to see, like, or the design, I would say, in different areas to see where the gaps might be?
Yeah, in high level in product development, like a lot of the use cases, you try to build what's, people call digital twin, but sort of a virtual prototype of what you're going to build, right? And so the more complex the product is, the more of that work basically gets done in an industry, right? So if you think about a rocket or an airplane, it's pretty expensive to build prototypes and test them. And so you do a lot of virtual development. Life sciences, you do a lot as well, because like it's a pretty expensive process to bring, say, a drug to market or a medical device to market. And so you try to do all that sort of virtual work up front, right? And then if you sort of done it all correctly, you've simulated all the scenarios. And so you have sort of this digital twin of what you're actually going to build. But then you have to physically build it and test it and, actually put it in service. And so there's a lot of re-simulation and things that happen throughout the development process. But the kind of core IP of like, what's the physics reasons that this is like a great rocket design is done upfront virtually, just because it's pretty expensive to test physically.
I wasn't even aware that you could do that in life sciences. Like, you could simulate some of these things. Like you're simulating cells and molecules and stuff like that.
Yeah. So like molecular dynamics, we know exactly how molecules behave. The challenge is that like the physics is well understood. Scaling them becomes very hard, right? And so there's so many different types of molecules and proteins that can be built that you can, it's a pretty broad search space. So computationally, these things actually get pretty expensive.
Isn't that how they discovered the COVID vaccine? They simulated the RNA and
RNA.
found the spike protein or something.
Yeah, they did it pretty fast because one thing interesting in life sciences is still there's a lot of for good reasons, a lot of actual physical testing that still happens in the different types of trial process, et cetera, to bring a drug to market. In COVID, I think that was quite accelerated. But that early process of identifying the right kind of prospect targets was done in a few days using these kind of simulations. Yeah.
That's cool. What's it been like running this company for like almost 15 years, right? Has it been the same thing? Does it get tiring sometimes? Like
it's a smooth journey, right? Yours just been up and
yeah, everything up and to the right. You just ride that exponential growth curve.
Yeah.
No, it's been quite challenging, of course. Lots of ups and downs along the way. I think, there's not many founders, frankly, that have this like stick with the same thing for like 15 years, right?
Yeah,
and so there's there's a small group of folks I think who could really relate to that. The ones who do, by the way, often are the like hottest, hyped up companies, right? And so their journey is also sometimes a little bit different than maybe a company that kind of grinds it out. But I've learned a lot. So I think for myself, it's been an amazing kind of growth journey and like going from, when I first came to Silicon Valley, I didn't know any other entrepreneurs really. I just had this sort of technical background. And I felt like, I was embraced nicely, learned a lot along the way. I do think also scaling a company is quite different from the early days, right? And so a lot of the lessons kind of apply, but you have to kind of reinvent yourself every year, I feel like, especially with now new technology happening at a pretty rapid pace with AI stuff, that you need to be willing to kind of, reinvent, rethink how you operate the company, what kind of technologies are important for your customer base, things like that.
Was there a moment for you where it went from like, oh, will this company survive like every quarter or whatever, or every month where you're like, oh, maybe we're going to die, to like, oh, actually like we've, crossed that chasm and now we're like, obviously you're trying to grow faster or whatever, but like it's not existential. Like, was there a moment where that flipped?
Yeah, I think it's, well, there are a couple like key moments that kind of felt like that. The most, when we were default alive, was like a key thing, which is sort of like you look at your runway, you look at your burn rate. For us, that's like, I would say we've had actually a couple times when we thought we were default alive, but turned out not to be. But I would say Series C and Series D milestones where we had a plan certainly for default to live.
What year was that?
So it was like 2020, and then our last
so like
raise was
7
earlier
years
this
kind
year.
of into it.
Yeah, and it's like I do think early on, when we were just like 4 or 5 people, we were probably default alive with our first raise as well. But like, I think, ambitions change for the company. You change kind of the goals and trajectory, and so you sort of adjust as you go. It's. I think that is, I got a nice email from Paul. He was the only one who really like congratulated us specifically on that. He was like, yeah, okay, now you're default alive. This is huge because now you're sort of in control of your own destiny. I think founders always feel that way. I'm not sure everybody else always realizes how important that milestone really is.
I remember at HeyZap, like going for, I think it was like 5 years before we were default alive. Like it's such a I don't know, maybe it's like my specific paranoia, but after like all the times that like I struggle to fundraise to like finally be default alive is such a relief. Like it's hard to like explain to people who've like not gone through that journey.
Yeah, but I think Joris, you mentioned something really important, which is like you thought you were default alive, maybe you weren't. Like I think people, I think PG's like essay about this like talks about like that as being almost a permanent state, which is definitely not, right? Especially when you're you're assuming that you have this capital, and like of course you do a runway calculation and everything seems good, but the metrics don't necessarily go the way you planned, and then you're like scrambling, right? This happens a lot, I think. The only way I would define default alive is like cash flow positive, with like sustainable long-term like revenue, but I wouldn't add like capital to that personally. Like Imad, like what would you think on that? Like because I think I don't know what you've announced.
There's like different layers to it, right? Like there is a version of default alive which is like, hey, I just raised a bunch of money and I have a path to like being cash flow positive, and I can like clearly see it. And that is the version. It does feel good if you have that clear path. But yeah, I agree. Like the ultimate is like you both have a lot of money in the bank, so you can like weather some recession or some like big client like churning or whatever, and you're like cash flow positive. You could like pile up the ands for sure. But like each one of them like feels good in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, bank account going up, even if it's just a day or a month or a year, depends obviously on what sort of time horizon, is also a really nice milestone, because it usually goes down for a while when you're in the sort of VC world for a while.
What do you guys think of this kind of the general VC vibe? I mean, I'm sure there's some VC listening to this podcast and going like, why are you even thinking about default alive? Like you should be growing faster. And like, what do you think of this general kind of vibe of like spend more money to grow faster versus caring about being default alive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you're talking to someone who's been sort of grinding for 15 years, right? So like my answer might be a little different than other people's. I think, and we've always had the approach of you raise the money, you sort of have this big vision, of course, and investors are along for that journey, but you should really be smart about how you spend it, right? And be pretty careful on that. I think it's totally fine to raise money and just kind of leave it in the bank for a while and not even touch it. This is something people like. If you have a big like outcome as a founder and you actually get a lot of liquidity, the advice is always like, don't go spend the money on Lamborghinis and like fancy vacations immediately. Like think about it for a little bit and then be smart about how you invest your money. I think companies should maybe be similar that way, right? I do think that this is where this sort of purely cash flow positive, very important. But I do think you kind of want to operate your company as like sort of break even ideally, because if you're not investing more in R&D, it's sort of a signal that like maybe you don't have good ideas, right? And you're just sort of piling up cash. But it's always nice to have the buffer, right? And so I think it's totally fine to raise money as a strategy, to have the option to invest in future growth projects that you might not be activating right away. For VCs, I think their perspective is quite different, where it's like, I just gave you the money. You should be like investing this in growth immediately, right? Because it's a different set of incentives, right? Like for them, the worst outcome is you put it in these growth and they have the option to put more money into your company. So actually get more ownership if those things go well and you spent the money.
But it's kind of
right?
interesting that you said like, hey, you should be putting in more in R&D. I think a lot of VCs would say you should be putting in more in GTM, like you should be putting more in sales and marketing. So like, why not spend on sales and marketing more if like you have extra cash flow rather than like R&D?
Yeah, it could be either. I mean, I always think R&D are usually the longest term investment projects, right? That are the sort of hardest, like long horizons. But yeah, it could totally be like GTM, especially if it's like everything seems to be working and you just want to sort of accelerate the velocity. But again, back to like, I think VCs are willing to put like way more risk on the company. Like they have a portfolio, you don't have a portfolio. And there is this key thing, which is like, oh, we're all aligned, but like, this choice to invest more money into the company is still their choice, right? Not necessarily yours. And so that's, I think that, if you then, you're better off kind of having a buffer of cash internally, and then you invest kind of as a VC kind of internally, but you have the capital and the choice to go for growth or go for R&D or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing for founders to really think about, that they don't want, VCs and even their team actually to some degree will push them to spend. The team members do this as well. Like it's not just VCs, right? And like we have so much money in the bank. We just did this big press release. Let's spend on 10 more engineers or whatever it is, right? So there's an incentive not just from the VCs. It's also from like managers, actually executives will often try to do that. So founders have to be the ones kind of like holding the line on some of the spending, if they want to keep ownership. Yeah.
I'm originally Dutch, so like I try to sort of in the DNA of the culture of the company is being frugal is sort of a key habit of Dutch people. We also like I try to encourage everybody to spend it like it's your own money, right? Like and that sort of worked for a while. I will say, like, once we crossed 100 people, like I realized, hey, people have very different spending habits. And so maybe, spend it responsibly is a better guidance, right? But yeah, I think this sort of like, hey, it's really money coming out of your own pocket changes behavior for sure.
Have you put in any kind of process in place or like headcount planning process or something that like reinforces this idea of like, being frugal and like being careful?
What I try to do is help. I mean, we're now a company of a size. We have a formal budgeting process. We sort of plan how much we're going to invest and spend like every year. We run that through the board and everything. It's a pretty well-oiled machine. I think on the actual decisions, though, what I try to kind of coach the executives on is like, often you get in this situation of like, hey, we want to do X, right? And we think this is great. And that in isolation maybe looks like a totally fine, reasonable investment. But if you have them help make the sort of trade-off resource allocation decision, right? Where you say you have a fixed bucket of Y, and then it's like you want to add X to the spend, you got to take something else off. I think when you make the decision in isolation, it's very easy to overspend and just say yes to a lot of things. I think when you say, hey, here's exactly the trade-offs, and it's sort of a fixed amount you have to trade off against other initiatives or whatever it might be, you get much better answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm actually bad at this because I always want to do everything. I wonder if there's like I feel like I need some coaching. So you're saying your team wants to do everything, but you're like, hey, you guys need to make the trade-offs. That's like how it ends up being rather than you wanting to do everything and you like not necessarily saying the trade-offs.
Well, I'm kind of like in your camp there. I'm probably more the same as you, where I do want to do many things. We do put some things in place, though, to force focus. Like I do believe that like running fast on like a very focused like mission is super important, and have everybody in the company aligned to that. And so we do like an annual strategy memo that is pretty short, and it's like it says exactly what we want to do, right? And that's sort of our focus for the whole year. And we try to kind of run really hard at those specific things. So that forces some level of prioritization. And if it's not in that memo, we just tell also the team it's like sort of by default not as important, right? But then I personally do have this like, I want to say yes to a lot of things. I think a lot of founders are always open to new ideas and new initiatives and things. It's just, I think the discussion is always like, yes, we can do it, but we can do it in a much more lean, like scrappy way. And so I think having in the company, what we've done is like on our newer initiatives and teams, try to keep those teams really small and scrappy. And also even the personalities and the types of people there are a little bit different than, what we call our sort of core, right? Our core sort of drives all the revenue. It's a lot of expansion with very large enterprise customers, big SLAs, et cetera. You want a very heavy process, and it's sort of expensive to change things. But then on the other part, where it's more innovative, we try to kind of have this culture that's very scrappy, right? And then you can test a lot of hypotheses for sort of like a founder would test it, right? Like for very cheap and very scrappy, without necessarily having to kind of compromise on the entire company operating model.
Yeah, I often sometimes the team will come to me and say like, oh, either we can do this or that, and I want to do both. And then I'm like, hey, let's just do both. And then the team will drop like some third thing that we weren't even talking about. Or they'll like thin down the two things into like, what it really takes to like test the ideas out. But that's like a lot of the time I feel like the decision I make is like, okay, just do both, which like the team definitely finds annoying. But I hate these kind of false trade-offs where you have to like make a decision between like two important things.
Why not do them in sequence though? Like do the first thing, and if it's good, then you can do the second thing.
It just depends what the things are. But sure, that's definitely a answer to that trade-off. But it's often like, oh, we're planning like some big thing, and then, it's like a 6-month type thing. And then I don't want to wait 6 months to try the second thing. But yeah, depends on the situation.
I think you have this problem, Imad, maybe, I don't know, but like of having a lot of resources. You just have a lot of resources, so you can do a lot of things, and that can be, a good thing, but also a bad thing, right? And in some cases, and one thing I'm doing right now with some of my companies are both small, so like it forces prioritization, like extreme prioritization, and I find it really helps. Like it's just like everything has to be done in sequence, so you make better decisions, and one of the best things I think that we've done also intentionally is like not raise a bunch of money and just like focus on like, what's going to be the most important. And it actually, this is why you realize small teams actually can run really fast, is because like they have no choice. So they have to prioritize, right?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest as you scale a company. Once you're like hundreds of people, keeping that DNA in the company is always a sort of a challenge, right? And I think we've done a lot of things to try to encourage that, right? But it's a big challenge.
Have you been successful with hiring like ex-founders, like that stuff? I feel like that's like, it's always been around, but some companies have done a pretty good job of like going really heavy in that. Like Rippling is like an example that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would say we've gone very heavy on that. I do think we've made our mistakes in bringing in executives like externally, right, with different types of experiences, believing they've done certain things before, and they're sort of finding out along the way that didn't work out so well. We've had a lot more success, I think, empowering not necessarily founders, but I would say like almost just like sort of engineers in the company that have like entrepreneurial ambition, and they become kind of like their own little founder of that part of the company. And then you kind of provide the support, sort of like starting a company on easy mode, where like, they don't have to go fundraise. They have sort of maybe distribution because of the way our product and platform works. But they kind of, they're left to have a lot of autonomy and go figure things out for themselves. That's worked really well for us. And then for the, more at the executive level, I would say that they've all kind of grown up with the company, the ones that have been worked out really well. You can't always do that. So there's definitely a few really great exec hires that have happened, but it's very tricky to do that because they have to fit pretty nicely into your culture, right? And it's always hard when you're looking for someone with the right type of experience. How do you identify that very effectively in sort of a recruiting process?
But we have definitely taken people at the company and made them execs, but I find it hard to do often because like being an exec is like quite a unique thing and it's hard to learn. And at least like people early in the company might have never worked with an exec directly. So it's like they haven't had the examples to learn from, and I don't really have time to teach how to be an exec. Like I need the execs to be like pretty self-sufficient people. So you actually find that it works well to like find people in the company and promote them to exec?
I think so. Maybe one advantage for Rescale has been that we've been very, very steady in our growth, right? And so that gives you more time to maybe develop the talent and the sort of leadership. Ultimately, if you think of the company org chart as sort of like a pyramid, there's only a few that you really need sort of at the top, so to speak, right? But it is hard, right? But I think we found a lot more success. You know exactly what you're dealing with in that case, right? And you can sort of surround them with experts. I don't think they have to be from the company, right? Like, so it's like, I wouldn't call myself, for example, a marketing expert, right? But there's a way to kind of surround them with others, maybe marketing experts from other companies and sort of peer groups, just like founders would, right? Where it's like, okay, there's probably not going to learn that much from your board and your VCs, maybe, but you can learn a lot from other founders. So if they have the right kind of group surrounding them, I think you can get that sort of growth mindset and development if you have enough time. I think if your company is maybe in like super fast growth, I know Mercury's had some like amazing growth periods, and so then it's harder probably to do that.
Yeah. I think we've probably averaged like extra 35 or 40% people every year. So it's been like, there hasn't been like a point to like actually like take a little bit more of a gradual kind of step on it.
I think it's a really interesting point about like promoting people to exec roles. It's a very challenging transition, I think, because it's like the role is so different at the exec level, and like the game you're playing is completely different, right? Like at the exec level, people are almost. First of all, they have to be pretty entrepreneurial because they have to have high agency. And then second of all, they have to be able to communicate extremely well, right? That is often not a skill that you hone as an individual contributor or even, even as a mid-level manager. So I think it's a really good point. It's like and I actually don't know the answer. It's like, how do people learn those exec skills, in the first place? Because I'm always interviewing execs, but I'm not understanding exactly how they got to their place and what makes a good exec. So maybe it's a topic for another time.
Yeah, what's challenging, I think, is like if they're just really good at the, say, communication and those things, it's like somebody's got to do the real work, right? This is sort of like the founder mode thing. That's why hiring like founders is always like maybe a fix for this, because they've ran larger teams, but they also know like how to just get things done.
Yeah.
And what I find is like, it's just so hard to tell from interviews and references. I feel like you can get 20% if you do an amazing job, meaning like you do 5 to 10 back channel references, right? And then the other 80% kind of shows up, right? And so it's just hard. And then like executives are not going to go do like a trial project with your company probably, right? And so it's tough to find that identify those like skill sets outside in.
Yeah, it is tough. I think when you do reference calls, the one thing I always learn that it's hard to get from an interview is just like how hard they work and like what their motivation levels are, like intrinsically. I think that's the key thing that I'm always looking for. Other than that, and you can tell.
Like what's the question you asked? Like that's like gets the root of like how hard they work. Because if you say like how hard did they work, everyone's like
no. What happens is I find that people will say that they work hard. Like that will be one of the things that they speak. Like if people don't say that about them, then they may not be like the hard worker. So like people who work hard, like it's often one of the things that people remember about them is like, oh yeah, this person was like super high output. He's always he drives pretty hard. You can kind of see it from what people say organically, because you're always going to ask what their top strengths are, right? And so you're going to see.
That's good advice.
At Rescale, we're very focused on like grit and resilience is like a big company value for us. And so one of the things I do ask is like, what's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? Right? And you get all kinds of different answers. First of all, it's very interesting. You get to know the person, right?
But you say life, you don't say at work. Like you're like, you that feels like a personal story often rather than like a work story.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that's actually super helpful, right? Because like if you get sometimes you get work stories. It is a work context. You're doing the work interview, right? But everybody has a different definition of hard, right? And so like in the answer to that question, I feel like if you haven't like seen a lot of hard things, it's hard to know even for yourself. Like, will you survive at a startup? Right. And there's, I'm sure you guys have read hard thing about hard things, right? But like, that's a lot of startup journeys are kind of like that, right? And it's maybe not as compressed in that short amount of time, but you want people who are, are going to be able to go through those ups and downs, right? And so at least that's one question I asked that maybe helps give you some signal, right?
Yeah. I put out a tweet about this recently, and I think it's people don't internalize this enough, founders especially, like just the huge range of difficulty of different types of businesses. They're just massive. I mean, I've done a few different ones now, and I can see that it's a massive difference in like the difficulty level of of businesses. So people, often people will say, "Oh, founding a company is hard." Well, actually, some companies are much easier than others, to be honest, and like they just are.
What is the easiest type of company to found, Raj?
Like, I mean, to be honest, a lot of these, services companies or even B2B companies, I think are depending on the profile of the customer. So at Presto, we used to interview execs from another vertical company, which was Viva. Viva is this company selling. Basically, all they did was take former Salesforce people. They made us, and they took the CRM from Salesforce and they made it for pharmaceuticals. So that's all they did. They just took the same product and they made it customized for pharmaceuticals. And every exec told me this was like a super easy business because pharmaceuticals have so much money. They just have tons of money and they're looking to spend the money, right? Whereas we were selling to restaurant chains and restaurant chains didn't have money. So just the profile of the customer makes a huge difference. And the fact they didn't have to do any product innovation. They just took the product and made it a little bit customized for pharmaceuticals, right? And that's a $30 billion company, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's I do think Viva is a hard business to run, actually, personally, but because all the focus then becomes about go to market, and selling to pharmaceutical is hard, right? But what I totally agree with is some businesses are way harder, right? And so the challenge is that there's some startups that hit product market fit really early on, and it's just like a rocket ship, boom, to $1 billion, right? And they didn't build the way to $1 billion company. And then you don't really have the muscle from that point to scale it easily to the next $10 billion company, right? And if you're not able to kind of rebuild the company, because the lessons you learn, if you just, for example, hit great product market fit or whatever, right? It's say take Viva as an example. I'm not super familiar with their business, but if they wanted to go multi-product, it'd be pretty tough because they don't have a great product development function because they just, built something that's sort of a shim on Salesforce. But I think, so I think there's sort of pros and cons. And I mean, at least maybe it's a story I tell myself, right? Because I've been grinding for so long. And I'm like, hey, Rescale so great to scale from this point forward because we have a bunch of people who are very gritty, resilient, and know how to kind of deterministically build success, right? And if you just kind of fell into the gold mine, it's hard to scale the business from there, right? And there's many examples of businesses like that, right? And so
I'd also say two other things. Number one, I think when you have that, especially initially when it's hard, it is a moat in its own way. There's a few AI companies I talk to where they're there's quite a few of these that go from 0 to 5 million or something in less than a year. And in some ways, not only was that easy, but it also it was easy partly because the moment's right, the time is right, the idea is right, the technology is there, etc. But it's also easy come, easy go to some extent. That whole idea can literally evaporate in the next year because technology changes or 5 competitors come and their margins completely collapse and you can go from 0 to 5 back down to 2, and that is very depressing. I'd rather go 0 to 5 over 2 years or 3 years and or even 5 years and then feel that's I built enough of a moat or something that it was hard because otherwise it's not necessarily sustainable. I mean, obviously many of them will reach escape velocity and establish a brand and blah blah blah. But there's so many companies doing this in AI right now. It's actually crazy to see. It's not a few years ago it was such a rare company that would go from 0 to 5 in 1 year or something. Whereas now it's I don't know how many, but more than 50 have done it.
Yeah, totally agree. And, I think, easy come, easy go makes sense. I mean, the other thing is, I think, this journey is also true for individual founders, right? I think, there's this thing that founders have to kind of pay their dues to some degree. All of us have to go through very difficult experiences. And if you look at even famous founders like Steve Jobs, he went through really difficult times, running Next, really grinding it out for 10 years, even the first Apple, made a lot of mistakes that kind of all led him to the third decade of success, right? And you can see, if you look at the historical, his interviews and stuff, he learned from those first 2 decades, and he got much better, in that third decade, right? And a lot of the mistakes he made early on, he actually corrected, like, how to be financially conservative, right? How to like design like a consumer product such that it has a good moat, with like, the App Store and stuff like that. So he, I think there's also this personal journey as well, that not just within each company, but within a person.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And not to like I think Next Computer gets a little bit of a bad rep, right? Because it wasn't successful in the market. But I think that company was literally like Steve Jobs, just do it exactly the way you want to do it, right? And it had all kinds of crazy stuff. I grew up programming on the Next Computer, so like I have a soft spot for it. But yeah. We had one at home.
What kind of crazy stuff did it do?
It was one of the first, like, had an optical drive that was like totally new. There were no optical drives. It was the first computer that was like for like the entire Mac OS interface. Is basically what originally was like the Next kind of user interface. So it was a way better interface. It had, he was buddies with Stephen Wolfram, and so that like Mathematica preloaded, and like you could do all kinds of crazy math stuff on it. But crazy things he also did were like, the problem was the thing was just way too expensive, right? So it was like, okay, we have this thing called the Next Cube. And this cube, basically you want it to be exactly 90-degree angles, right? If you know anything about like sort of forging a box like that, it was a titanium box that's perfectly a cube, right? And of course, Steve Jobs wanted it to be exactly that way. It's very hard to do a draw angle like at exactly 90 degrees, right? And so like, basically close to impossible to manufacture. So they had to build their own manufacturing facility to kind of stamp out these like perfect cubes. But it is a piece of art, right? It was just like not successful because it was so expensive. So they could only sell it to like big universities.
According to ChatGPT, in today's dollars term, it was $25,000. At the time, it was 6,500 to 13,000. But that's actually pretty insane for a computer. Even now, like Nova has a $25,000 computer. Why did you have on yours? Well, what were you doing at home that reserves a $25,000 computer?
That's a great question. My dad was a big Steve Jobs fan, and we were not that well to do. It was just that.
You like mortgage this house to get a Next Cube.
We did have a lot of computers, and he just kind of did a lot of work on computers, and so we just had this thing. And but it was amazing, right? I would say great example of a product way too early, right, to market. It was had all these new things all jammed into one product, and it never totally took off, right? Like because they were just too early and way
I
too
guess you could say it worked because that's like the acquisition of Next is what got him back at Apple. So like maybe it needed to happen even though it was ridiculous.
That was because of the OS, right? The OS was really what Apple bought, I think.
Yeah, and so like the software I think was extensible and they built upon that, but big part was by Steve too, right?
Yeah, of course.
I feel like this is becoming CEOs in arms as well. We should maybe do the rapid fire. Do you want to do the rapid fire?
Sure, let's do it.
What's the riskiest bet you've made that somehow worked out?
I think for us, it's been always these kind of longer term R&D investments because like we invested in an AI product early that worked out really well. Like, so we now have this sort of AI physics operating system to help our customers build their own AI models. At the time, when we started that investment, I would say it was still pretty controversial whether this space would even like...
when did you do that?
Probably about 2.5 years ago.
Cool.
But I think another one, which I would say, like, we don't yet know, like, how this is going to pan out, although, like, we have some success already with, we do a lot of work with Department of Defense. And so we have this sort of entire platform commitment over a multi-year period to get certified for FedRAMP, IL5, all these things to be able to serve this sort of, like, defense industry. That's been a huge investment from our side. And we're still going through the final steps there, but we have DoD as a customer, and it's like all scaling. So like that seems like a really good bet as well. Talking about earlier Ahmad on moats, like that's one where like you got to be a little crazy to be willing to kind of go through all the process to get a software product that's like easily the Department of Defense can be using. And so we were willing to go for that journey, and so far it's been paying off.
Did you talk to our last guest, Ian Teen? He's also doing a lot of stuff with the department. He talked about all these acronyms.
Yeah, I've met him briefly before at like one of these. So for like all these different certifications. It's definitely a slog, right? Like his approach is a little bit different because it's sort of like you kind of lift and shift the software into these environments. Like we need to get the entire kind of cloud like product and our company kind of certified to be able to kind of service it that way. And so that's it's challenging. It's been about a 5-year journey for us so far.
Wow.
What would you say is the most expensive or biggest mistake that you feel you've made at Rescale?
Yeah, our biggest mistakes have always been people.
Okay. You should have named them.
Yeah. Well, I think if you make a bad exec hire, right? Like, I think that's why founders talk a lot about this sort of like, how do you get great exec hires and this whole like founder mode thing. And I think if you make a bad hire, it's like, it's not only that individual hire, like, and hopefully you can fix it quickly, but if it's a senior person, right, you got to give them some time. And so like,
I think one of the things that's tricky about bad exec hires, like you kind of assume that they know more than you. So it takes a long time to get confidence to go like, oh, actually, this was just a mistake, because you're like, maybe I just don't know about X, you know?
Yes. And that's where I have learned over time. So like, be totally comfortable. And founders are usually pretty good at this, but like, asking the obvious, easy questions, right? Like, well, why is it that way? Right. And are these people able to build things from first principles? Do they really understand? Did they build the system at the previous company, or did they just run the system? Right. But the challenge is like they hire other people, right? And they can change your company culture. And so unwinding some of that is like a multi-year process. And the costs to the company of that can really be pretty high. I think that's why recruiting is so important. I mean, I still interview every person that joins the company. And I think that's a big time investment, but totally worth it.
Do you still interview every single one? How big is the company?
I do. So we're a little over 200.
Oh, I did that up to like 180 people, but it was just like, I was like being too much of a bottleneck for the recruiting team at one point.
Yeah, you need an efficient system. So like, but I think it is really good to get a sense. It also gives like every person that joins the company like a sense of you, right? Like, which is hard to, as you probably know, like when you get to like hundreds of people, you don't get to work with them the same way you used to do as like a founder and like, 10 people sitting around a table. And so it's nice to have a little bit of that relationship, I think.
Part of the reason I stopped is I found that I wasn't saying no enough. Like I was like basically letting 95% of them through. Do you feel like you still say no a lot, even though you're interviewing everyone and it's like a role that you're like not necessarily like managing or like owning?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do say no, but the team doesn't always, like, we don't have everybody has to agree. So like I disagree and commit to certain hires, even if I say no.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, when I'm a no, it's very hard to get someone hired.
I mean, like if it's a hard no, it's like, that's, you can have a hard no.
But like, a soft no, yeah.
I think it's, yeah, but that'd be on something that's just like a little bit riskier hire, et cetera, whatever it might be. If it's, the different roles are also different stakes, but I think it's great to know everybody, right? And you need to build system. I don't know how you feel about this, Ahmad, but like, when you have so many people in your company, like you kind of want to be able to kind of easily work with them, right? Without a sort of high barrier to like, oh, I'm like gonna go talk to Ahmad or whatever, right? And so I think you got to build some things in place or put some things in place that sort of help you have that more direct relationship with your entire team.
Well, I mean, what I used to do was onboarding meetings. I used to just have like, I would welcome meetings. I'd welcome all the new hires in like
one-on-one or one-to-many?
One-to-many the first week.
I do those one-to-many, but I don't know if that's enough. Like that's like, I did one yesterday. There was like 40 people we onboarded in the last month in that meeting. And I'm like, wow, that is really making a connection.
40 is too much.
Yeah, I do find one-on-one, you just get a different dialogue going, right? People are like more willing to ask like hard questions. You get to know them a little bit better. Yeah. Yeah.
I do think as CEO, it's important to be able to like message anyone in the company and have an honest conversation, quickly, right? And actually, it's really important diligence, especially even on your execs, right? You're like in your management team, you want to get to the truth quickly, right? And I think people like Elon do this as well. He'll talk to any engineer and like try to get to the bottom of something quickly, right? And you also want to identify talent, yeah.
I think that's exactly right. And like you do need to, that's why those relationships are super important. For founders, I think it comes pretty natural because you've sort of done a lot of these functions. So you know exactly what the BDR, day to day is like, right? And so like you can easily kind of work with them. I do find for others, sometimes it's hard, right? Like if all you did is finance your whole life, it's hard to go over to talk to a software engineer who's can't understand half of what they're saying, right? And so, but yeah, I think one thing we do for also as maybe a helpful tip for other founders, And I learned this, I think, from High Growth Handbook. Have you guys read that book?
Elad,
So one of the things in there is this like thing he got from Urs Hosel, was an early Google engineering manager. And Google tried this experiment where they said, hey, how about we have no more managers and everybody report to one person?
Oh, yeah.
And then he created this document of like, because it's really hard, obviously, to manage like 200 people. Impossible, pretty much. But he created this document of like working with Urs document, right? And so there's like an open document in the company we have, which is called Working with Joris. And I encourage other people to do the same thing. So you can just kind of read this document and get a sense of like, there's all kinds of stuff in there, like what kind of books I like, what's my like personality type, what are sort of principles I believe in, etc. That makes it kind of low barrier to entry to have a direct working relationship with somebody.
I read that book when I don't think I had a big company at all. So I feel like I should reread that book because it was a great book, but it was like, it's all set up as like a reference guide to when you have a company that's like at scale.
Growing. Yeah.
What I love about that book is just like, it was done just such a good job in like both interviewing like experts in each of these functions. And it's very tactical. There's a real playbook in there.
Tactical.
Yeah. And that is, I do think it's like, we haven't done like, for example, a lot of M&A or whatever, but if you're like for the first time figuring out, okay, how do we do some M&A? There's a whole thing in there for that, right? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I think we're actually out of time. Unfortunately, I have more questions, but we're out of time. We'll have to have you back.
We're bad at rapid firing the rapid fire.
Yeah, exactly.
It gets too interesting.
Pretty fail rapid fire. Sorry, this is probably
we ask the questions, but we just go yap on about it.
Yeah, too many follow-ups. All right, cool, man. This was great having you. I'm glad we finally made this happen.
Yeah, thanks for joining yours. Let me know when you're in SF next time. We should grab a drink.
Let's do it. See you guys.
Thanks everyone for listening. Please leave us a review on whatever channel you're listening on. Makes a big difference to the algorithm and to the success of the show. And see you all next week.